Night knows when Scott and Margie are still trying to champion the film. Okay, we're here with Kevin Baker, another one of the stars of Diner. Kevin, welcome.
Bacon, but that's okay.
Okay, let me start again. We're here with Kevin Bacon, another one of the stars of Diner. Kevin, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Congratulations on the success of the film.
Thank you.
I understand that you were something of a teen idol when you were star of The Guiding Light, the soap.
I would say that there's you can be a soap star and you can be a teen idol, and being a teen idol is a much different thing, which I don't really think I was. I was not a real big soap star, but what happens is you're on that type of show, and a lot of the magazines approach you, soap magazines, and to the soap opera audience, you're very, very popular. If anyone who's never turned on the television, they have no idea really who you are at all. And I started to do interviews for the magazines and stuff like that, and it was fun because it's like kind of like a star in one very small part of the entertainment business, and at least you get kind of a taste of what that's like, but it doesn't really sustain into any other area.
Did you find that was a good training ground for you as an actor?
Oh yeah, absolutely. For one thing, you see yourself on video. If you can watch, if you want to watch as many shows as you do a week, you see, and that's a lot of help, especially because of a lot of tensions are real up front, and you can see that when it's on the camera, things that you do, like this or like this, and you can try to get rid of them, and also you become very professional, I think, because you have to work constantly and learn a lot of lines and be there every day on time, and it makes you appreciate professionalism.
And you learn how to work under pressure, I would assume.
Under pressure, I'd say, yeah, very much so. And also, you learn something about camera. People talk about it. The camera technique on soaps gives you a lot of training for film. It's a very, very different kind of thing. Very different. But you do at least get comfortable with the idea of having a big thing sitting there and being able to act without shouting.
How did you get involved in Diner?
I auditioned for it.
Really?
Yeah, I got, the casting director calls the agent gives you the appointment, you go and you read for the casting director says you should read for the director, and I read for Barry maybe 4 or 5 times. I read a lot of stuff. Well, originally I went in and read for Billy, who was sort of the straighter kind of guy and more of a lover, and Boogie, who was the tough guy. And those are the 2 auditions that I prepare. Those are two parts that I hadn't thought of myself as when reading the script. I went in and I read Billy, and he went, I don't really think I want you to read Billy. And I said, well, can I just read Boogie, because I also did that? He said, oh, okay, you can read it. After I was done, he said, I want you to read this character, Fenwick, which I'd never really thought of myself as. I never pictured myself in that part before. But I went out and looked at the script again. I looked at the sides, which are, parts of the script that you read. It's like pages. And I said, okay, well, I think I have an idea for this. And I went in and just something like clicked, and I came out with that kind of Fenwick sort of voice, real low and sort of like, hey, how you doing? And kind of the whole idea of being drunk and smiling, and that whole thing.
There are 2 classic Fenwick scenes in the film. One, of course, you're watching Hollywood Bowl and you're beating all the contestants on the show, and the other is, of course, the scene in which you end up sitting, or I should say, reclining in the cradle in a nativity display.
Yeah.
What kind of were those in the script? Did you improvise any of that? Is that just Barry Levinson's crazy brain? Or?
No, those were both in the script. Mm-hmm. Both of those scenes. The College Bowl was in the script, but not with those actual questions and answers. When he had an idea for that scene, but he didn't know which specific College Bowl he was going to use. So finally we got the tape of it, and I sat on the set that day for hours and hours. Reading looking at this videotape with a headset on of this particular College Bowl, and trying to memorize these things, which was like, I don't know any of those questions. You could ask me any of those questions, I had no idea whatsoever. So I spent a lot of time looking at that, and finally started to memorize them. And out of probably, how many did they use in the picture? I think you maybe saw 3 answers or 4 answers. I did almost the whole show without commercials. I answered the questions to almost every one. And I would screw up, I'd get the wrong answer sometimes too. But the rest of the reaction. So the scene itself was in there. The reactions were all improvised. Hooting at the people and telling them to go home, and that was all kind of just something they just rolled the camera and I just did it.
I asked both Jessica James and Dan Stern if they were surprised by the success of Diner. Jessica James says she isn't surprised, and Dan Stern says that he is very surprised. What about you? How do you feel?
I'm surprised. I love the picture, and I think it's a great picture, but it doesn't have any, car crash to speak of. There's no sex and no violence, spaceships, and that. So it's surprising that it's done pretty well, and I think that surprises me. I'm also always sort of surprised that something that I'm involved in is going to do well. I don't know why. It's just insecure, I guess, in that way. That it was definitely a surprise for me.
Do you think it was word of mouth or the critical acclaim that helped make Diner the hit that it is?
I think it's both. I think the critics really came out for us, and I think that's a great thing. And I haven't read a bad review yet. I've read some sort of okay reviews, and I appreciate that. In a business where you're sort of brought up to hate the critics, I love them now. I think they're great. But if you have 10 critics and it touches something in all of them, it's got to. They're just for every 100,000 people, there's one critic, or whatever. So it's got to be touching a lot of people too, and I think a lot of it had to do with the word of mouth. It started in New York, and people started talking in New York, and I think it's kind of has a New York feel to it in a strange sort of way. A lot of us were from New York, and it's very East Coast, and I think it started kind of to grow in that way. And then,
do you remember the '50s in the way that Barry Levinson does? I mean, were you?
I remember them very well. Yes. Yeah, sure. I remember 1959. I was a year old, and I had some great memories from back then. Nursing, and I started to walk. I started walking in the '50s actually.
Do you have any idea why that period is? Why there was so much nostalgia?
So much nostalgia about the 50s?
Yeah.
Well, I think nostalgia is usually 20 years after when that's when you start getting nostalgic, I mean, the 60s are very nostalgic now, in 1980. I think people are getting very nostalgic. I've just read a book about the 60s, and it's like very fascinating.
Sure, but the 40s, no, I don't think people were nostalgic for the 40s, and I don't.
They weren't in the 60s. They weren't nostalgic. I don't know. Maybe they weren't.
I don't think people will be.
I don't know why.
For the 70s,
Why the 50s?
do you? Will there be a 70s nostalgia movement? Bring back disco.
Yeah, sure there will. People look at like old films like Saturday Night Fever and say, "Wow, that was really amazing. What was going on back then?" I don't know. I think that. It's a funny thing. A lot of people ask me about the 50s, and in shooting the film, I did very little thinking actually about it. There are certain givens, the hairstyles, the clothes, and things that you knew about, that you could tell from reading the script about who these guys were, at that time. But there's certain, it's kind of universal, So I didn't act like someone from the 50s. That's what I'm trying to say, I don't know what it is about the 50s. There has been a lot, Grease and the whole thing.
Yes.
I think Barry set out to make something that was not the cliche.
The 50s, but about his own life.
I think so, but also not a cliche of the 50s. He was very specific, and then none of us wore leather jackets, and none of us had DAs really, And the cars were old cars, but they weren't souped up, There wasn't a sort of at the hop type feeling to the picture. And I think that's a piece of the 50s that has maybe not been shown that much. Was that movie about the 50s, Last Picture Show? That was about the 50s, right?
Last Picture Show, Lords of Flatbush.
Yeah, I didn't see Lords of Flatbush.
When Diner opened, you were, as I recall, in an off-Broadway show called Poor Little Lambs. Is that right?
When Diner opened, yeah, I think I was in Poor Little Lambs at that time. Right.
What kind of effect did that have on you as a Broadway actor? Were people coming in after seeing?
Well, I've never been a Broadway actor now. I've done a lot of off-Broadway too. I don't think that anybody. See, I don't think that Diner is the type of thing that you go away and you say that's a movie with Kevin Bacon and a Dan Stern Tendelli. And I think that you see these actors, and then if you see them, if you recognize them again, you say, oh, that's the guy in Diner. It's not like and I think that Poor Little Lambs was also a real group effort. You know, it was 8 guys and 1 girl in that, and I don't think people came down to the theater to see me because they see me in Diner. I mean, maybe they have, but I find it very hard to believe. Plus the fact that I, done a lot of plays, and I think that if anything, they might have come down because of having seen other plays, because there's a theater audience that kind of builds itself up, and knows a lot of theater.
I asked Dan Stern this question. I want to ask you: Is there life after Diner?
Oh shit, I hope so, man. There's life. There's life. There's definitely life.
What's happening with you?
Well, I'm very much in love, and I just had a nice vacation, and I did a movie since then called Enormous Changes at the Last Minute, which is a very low budget cable thing. It might be a theatrical release, and that was a lot of fun. I had a good time working on that.
So Diner's been good for your career and good for your life?
Yeah, it's been great.
Well, congratulations on the success of the film. Thanks a lot for talking to us.
Thank you.
Thank you, boys.